Welcome to The Secrets of Success. By following the proven techniques of the guests who appear on this series, you'll learn that even successful people run into detours and failures, and how you can apply their success techniques to change your life.
You're now listening to the most unique show on radio, the show dedicated to making you a success. In a world of change, are you tuning out or tuning in? Let's see what our guest, Bob Rosen, has to say. Bob, thanks for being with us today.
My pleasure.
Now, Bob, you're the author of a book, Conscious, The Power of Awareness in Business and Life. And you start out, I love the quote that begins chapter 1. It is not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent. It's the one that is most adaptable to change. Can you talk about that?
Sure. It's a famous quote by Charles Darwin. And many of us grew up in a paradigm where the goal was to be the smartest person in the room. That gets you in the room, but what keeps us in the room is a new concept called being conscious. Conscious is about being aware of yourself, being aware of others, and being aware of the environment, because everybody is operating in a world of change. And some people are exhausted by the change. Some people are overwhelmed by the change, but everybody has to keep up. The problem is that the world is changing faster than our ability to adapt, and many of us are simply falling behind.
That's is actually going to be one of my questions to you, because it certainly includes me, because my wife recently bought a new car, and I have to ask her, where is this button? Where is that? What does this do? And when she starts turning on that screen there and different things pop up, it used to be easy to turn on the radio. That was one thing I could handle. Now I've got to touch the screen in a few different places, and I usually mess things up for her. So it's basically, don't touch anything, I'll do it. But a simple thing like a car and the radio, I really need help with. So I have to admit, I definitely fall into that. You tell us in your book that as a result of this, we become too reactive and we miss opportunities. Is that because we're either thinking too much or too worried?
Well, I think a lot of us are on autopilot, and we don't like the uncertainty that change brings. It makes us feel vulnerable. And plus, the pace of change is so fast. I mean, as your story talks about the technology on the radio, I mean, we all are bombarded by 6 disruptors of change. The pace of change, which is making us think faster and feel faster and act faster. The fact that stability is an illusion and that uncertainty is really the reality, and that the world is always unpredictable. The world's getting more complex, more choices, more data, more ideas, more decisions. Technology is the uber disruptor. I mean, every person's life, every business is being disrupted by technology. The world's gotten more competitive. It's just not competing in the United States. We're competing around the world. The 5 generations are competing with each other. And lastly is globalization. The world has gotten very small. And money and markets and people and suppliers and ideas, everything's connected. And so we're global citizens. And all these winds of change influence us. And we have 3 responses. We can put our head under the carpet and pretend they don't exist. We can be overwhelmed by them and live a very chaotic life, or we can leverage them, anticipate and leverage these winds for our own advantage. And that's what conscious is. Conscious is really a deeply human approach to personal change.
You've hit on so many good points in there: speed, uncertainty, complexity, technology, competition, globalization. I'm looking at them and I'm checking the list. I say, yep, I'm falling into that one. Yeah, I'm falling into that one. And one I think that really stood out to me: stability is an illusion and uncertainty is reality. Because I think most of us, we like to get in the car, or bus, or train, go to work. We feel comfortable with that. Well, work now might be for 3 years, and then we're looking for another job. The route we take to work obviously will change if indeed we get that other job. That's like the most basic thing, and yet that's changing certainly much more rapidly and causing us upsetment.
Well, one of the things that I've been saying as I've talked about this book around the country is that we have to change our relationship to change. And two things have to happen that are different. First off is that we have to sort of give up the illusion that stability actually exists. I mean, our body and our minds like stability and homeostasis, but the reality is that uncertainty is what really is happening every time we breathe. The second thing we have to change is that many of us see change as happening to us, and it feels overwhelming, or it's not, we don't get what we want, versus seeing change as happening for me, that it's showing up for me in a certain way that will allow me to learn, to grow, to transform myself. But it doesn't always feel good. And that's one of the points I also make in the book, is that we have to become more comfortable being uncomfortable. And by being more comfortable and allowing ourselves to deal with the uncertainty, it allows us to change our relationship to change, and it frees us up to not be so stressed.
I love that saying. Can you go back on it? More comfortable? What was it?
Being uncomfortable.
I'm writing it down here because I don't know how you do that. I don't know if there's a Stairmaster or a Peloton or one of those inventions that make us more comfortable, or if we practice sitting on a tack, or our child's toys or something like that. But I'll work on that and let you know how it works out and see what we do.
One of the things that we have to do is we have to understand ourselves. We've got to go deep. But the change forces us to lose our center. And because we are so obsessed with action at the expense of introspection, we get pushed around by the change rather than going deep. And really successful people allow themselves to reflect, to meditate, to go deep. And by doing that, they're better able to manage the ups and downs in life. They get hijacked by the threats of life less often. They don't get hijacked by negative emotions over positive emotions. And they tend not to magnify or generalize as much as other people. So one of the first steps of going conscious is to go deep, to become less shallow.
Bob, at this point, we'd like to just remind our listeners that you're listening to The Secrets of Success on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm your host, Bill Horan. Our guest today is Bob Rosen, and he's talking about his book, Conscious, The Power of Awareness in Business and Life. Bob, also, I'd like to let our audience know that while they're hearing you make these statements and talking about getting pushed around by change, this is not your first book. You've been doing this kind of stuff and writing books and helping businesses for something like 30 years?
Yeah, I've gotten off the train every couple of years. I've written 8 books on change and leadership, and the last 2 are really summarizing what I think are the 2 most important skills to actually thrive and survive in the world moving forward. My last book actually was a New York Times bestseller, was called Grounded. And that book taught us about how to stay rooted in a world and not get buffeted by all these changes, these disruptors. And Conscious lays out 4 powerful lessons. It's sort of the accelerant. So if Grounded helps us stay steady in the winds, Conscious allows us to adapt and to accelerate. And the whole focus of the book is that the more conscious you are, the more aware that you are of yourself and other people and your surroundings, the faster you can adapt and the higher performing you are. So it's being grounded and conscious is really critical. But we don't teach these skills. We don't hardly teach them in business. We don't teach them to children. We don't teach children how to thrive in uncertainty or to become resilient or to fall down and get up or to become comfortable being uncomfortable. But these are the skills that are important in a world that is dynamic and always changing.
Bob, if someone is interested in learning more about your book, Conscious, is there a website we can find out more?
Sure. It's you can go directly to healthycompanies.com, which is the company that I work in. I started some 30 years ago. And also you can go to any of the websites. Another website would be bobrosen.com, which has my books and things like that.
And we'll give that information later in the show once again, so if you didn't get it down, you'll have the opportunity to get it then. Bob, you mentioned in the book that there are 4 reasons why we're not changing fast enough. I figured one is I'm just a slowpoke, but you have legitimate reasons, so tell us what they are.
Well, first off is that we just did a Harris survey, and we asked Americans how well they are managing change. And 54%, over 50% of people say they're having real trouble adapting. And so in our research of talking to people and talking to leaders, we find that there's 4 reasons, 4 pitfalls for having trouble grasping change. The first is, as I mentioned before, is that we're too shallow. We're too unaware and superficial about what's going on inside of us. A second reason is that we're too narrow. We live in a steel box, and we're too biased and closed-minded in our perspective, and we can't see over the horizon into the future. Others of us are just simply too safe in their actions. They're afraid of change. They're too protective of themselves, too reactive to the world. And then lastly is a lot of people are just simply too small. They're too cautious or they're too self-centered, and so therefore they're too small in their impact. And the consequences is that individuals fall behind. They don't learn fast enough. And organizations similarly don't change fast enough. They don't transform. And as a result of being too shallow and too narrow and too safe and too small, many of our communities are not working. The tensions, the racial tensions, the Me Too movement, a lot of people who are less conscious, and they're not making full adult contributions to their communities. So it's a problem across all of society.
Bob, I'm just wondering, do you think in 1975, was there probably someone there saying, gee, things are just moving too fast? It's not like it was back in the 1950s or the 1960s?
I suspect that it's always been moving faster than what people are comfortable with. What has changed, I think, is technology. Technology is fundamentally accelerating the world, the choices we have, the various competitors that exist in the marketplace. Technology is changing our lives. We go to the beach and our iPhones are right there with our emails, and a lot of people are just really tired. And so what I try to make the point in the book is that if you can become more aware, more conscious, then it becomes sort of a wake-up call for you. And I think conscious people are happier and they're healthier. They're more agile and more innovative, and they're also more productive. So there's a business case for this as well as a personal case.
Has doing this book and writing the book, do you feel you're more or less conscious now? Oh,
I'm much more conscious. This was my favorite book. It was the hardest book that I wrote, but one of the things that I talk about in the book is that people are motivated by what we call accelerators. There are things in our life that drive us forward, like faith and optimism and confidence or focus, and everybody's different in terms of what accelerators drive you forward. It's really important to know what those accelerators are because you have to rely on them. At the same time, everybody has their share of hijackers, their tendency to control things, their perfectionism, thinking that is distorted, or their emotional derailers, or their tendency to mismanage anger or whatever. And we got to know our hijackers. And the more conscious we are of those accelerators and hijackers, the less the world controls us and the more we can sort of navigate through it and shape our own future.
Bob, at this point in the show, I want to remind our listeners that you're listening to The Secrets of Success. My name is Bill Horan. The show is produced at the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. We'll be right back after the break.
I'm a college student and could use advice about my student loan.
I had to leave school and go to work. Now I have to pay back student loans for a degree I don't have. Fortunately, I found assistance.
Back in college, I figured they wouldn't lend me more than I could easily pay back. Boy, was I wrong. Thankfully, I got the help I needed to pay back my loan in full.
Sound familiar? The good news is that student loan repayment options are